Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Frances Roberts Gregory, and thank you for joining us today for this press conference titled Accelerating Feminist Solutions to the Climate Crisis. Today, we will hear from panelists on the critical role of feminist perspectives and how these perspectives play an important role in formulating effective solutions to one of the most urgent challenges of our time, climate change. As speakers from the Green New Deal Coalition, as well as WECAN, share, they are welcome to introduce themselves. And following, we will have a bit of time at the end, hopefully, for Q&A. First, I will pass it to Catherine.
Thanks, Frances. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Catherine. I am the Communications Coordinator for the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, WECAN, and also a member of the Feminist Green New Deal Coalition based in the US, and a citizen of the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla, also based in the US. And I want to start today by explicitly saying that feminists at COP29 are the ones holding the line. They are fighting to ensure that language on gender, human rights, indigenous rights stays in the text being negotiated in these final days at COP. And let's be clear, there is no path forward without securing the rights of the people who are disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis, but also simultaneously the same people leading critical climate solutions. We've seen the last 2 weeks governments carry on with business as usual, looking to expand fossil fuel extraction while peddling false solutions to the climate crisis like carbon markets, removal technologies, nuclear, biodiversity, and carbon offsets, and so much more. While the US and other governments continue to tout these so-called solutions, we are here today to state clearly that what we actually need are solutions grounded in feminist and climate justice principles, solutions that communities globally have been advocating for years. One offering I want to mention today is how through our work at WECAN and also in the FemG&D, we've been looking explicitly at how to bring the ethic of care forward in a just transition. Care is a radical and transformative praxis, an antidote to our current extractive economy, and a framework for crafting and implementing policies and programs that center the health and well-being of people, ecosystems, and planet. As part of a just transition, we need a shift for public investment and cultural valuation in the care sector that leads away from a culture of extractivism, of our labor, of our land, of our humanity, and towards a transformation in gender norms, how we care for each other, and what is understood to be valuable work within a just transition. And that means we need to invest in and uplift the care economy. This also extends to the work of land and environmental defenders who are risking their lives to care for their territories and in turn our entire planet. Ensuring protections and safeguards for Indigenous peoples, environmental advocates, and land defenders must be a non-negotiable component of the just transition. Indigenous communities globally have been stewards of the earth for millennia, with 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity residing within indigenous territories. Yet these lands continue to be targeted for exploitation under the guise of progress for oil, gas, and so-called transition minerals within the this kind of just transition green economy framework. This extraction not only violates the sovereignty of Indigenous communities, but also undermines their rights to free, prior, and informed consent. A true just transition cannot and will not succeed through top-down mandates. It requires genuine, respectful, and intentional engagement and due diligence where Indigenous consent, sovereignty, and rights guide what happens on Indigenous lands and territories. When we center care, we honor our interdependence and our responsibility to one another and to the earth. It is our future on the line, and we will not allow our future to be defined by the corporations and governments that drove us into this crisis. We will not allow further sacrifice of our communities, ecosystems, and climate. The systems of capitalism, colonization, white supremacy, and patriarchy that brought us to this moment are crumbling, and within their fall, we have a chance to pave a path forward guided by justice, care, and solidarity. And in this context, women, feminists, Indigenous, Black, Brown, and frontline communities are leading with strategies, solutions, and insights into what's next and what future lies beyond the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Analia, please go ahead.
My name is Analia Schlegel dos Santos. I am an Afro-Brazilian Euro-American woman from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm the Environmental Justice Youth Program Director with Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, here with Climate Generation, repping U.S. Fair Shares and Shift Us and Climate Reparations Camp. The work I do centers on training young people as community organizers that operate through the lens of environmental justice. In my community in the United States, most of us have been intentionally kept away from community, being told for generations that we are in this life alone and we cannot and should not depend on others. This is but one effect of colonialism. Women and femme people have been healing these effects by holding community space for ages, indicative of a care economy. As we find our way back to community, the process of understanding what community looks and feels like is often unfamiliar and is unfortunately something that has kept my country from actively participating and leading in global community-centered solutions. This reality has and continues to keep certain people from joining together because us coming together means we will find an end to patterns of harm. It is not good enough to show up to this conference as a colonial power and pretend to not understand that the climate crisis is a gender, migrant, justice, food, environmental, health, wealth, class, and race issue. It is not enough to make subpar commitments to climate finance, purporting that we simply can't find the money, and then turn around and double and triple fossil fuel expansion and send tax dollars to fund wars, pollution, and ongoing colonialism. It is not good enough to phase out fossil fuels in one state within 2+ decades, and then sidle up to our fellow emitters and tell the world that everyone must contribute equally or we won't be able to fix this issue. It simply isn't good enough. Not to people and planet that are living through complex compound crises of spirit and livelihood. We must see the actualization of a just transition framework with concrete outcomes, something that almost all parties are in agreement with, so make it happen. The real solution to overlapping crises that we are experiencing globally is rooted in the principles of collective liberation. This idea that together we could actually get free is one that is alien and, again, unfamiliar to most. It is an idea that comes at a steep price, one that will cost us some comforts. That price may mean that we have to change everything we do, or we will continue to see harms caused. That price is one that most people in positions of power will never pay up willingly in this lifetime. What is the true cost of righting wrong relation? What is the true cost to collective liberation when my people in the US and Brazil, for example, have had our histories poisoned by enslavement and oppression? What is the true cost of a society that tells us that our bodies are political playgrounds and that our real priorities lie with the interests of capital gain and never-ending expansion? We can talk about the fact that a world living in the throes of late-stage capitalism is the problem, but at the base of that problem is an obsession with infinite growth. I'll remind everyone here that infinite growth is cancer. Infinite growth, however, is the way that we have come to understand success in our societies. The time has come and gone for countries to accept and do their fair share to address the climate crisis and compound crises. The time has come not only for us to participate in actualizing real solutions that are based in community and right relation, it has come time for us to humbly accept the narrative that we have set out for ourselves and change the future narrative for us and for our relatives for the next 7 generations. As you all know, the first Conference of Parties took place in 1995. To be exact, it ended on April 7th, 1995, a few short hours after my birth. It has taken 29 of these COPs to get to the here and now, one for every year of my life, and what have we actually done? What narrative have we crafted with years of research, innovation, yapping, and false solutions? Where do we even begin to address historic wrongs that have gotten us to this point? We can start by doing reparations as a down payment. We cannot hope to pay people to make up for lives, cultures, and livelihoods lost, as people in Black, brown, femme bodies know all too well. Reparations will never be enough, but we can start somewhere, and we have to start somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anaya. We will now hear from Sheila.
Getting my timer started, otherwise I will speak all day. So first off, I would like to thank the previous 2 speakers for setting the stage and expressing so many powerful concepts. I echo a lot of what they are saying. My name is Sheila Barefoot. I am Chiricahua Apache. My dad is Chiricahua Apache. My mother is white. I grew up displaced from traditional homelands in Tracy, California. So to be extremely clear, because this has been misconstrued before, I am not a tribal representative. I am only speaking for myself. So just to be extremely clear on that. I'm sure you're all wondering why I have this handprint on my face. Based on some comments that happened in a previous panel that I witnessed today, nothing bad, by the way, I decided that I wanted to draw additional attention to how our current climate crisis and the colonial solutions being proposed to it contribute to missing and murdered Indigenous relatives across the globe. That is what this handprint symbolizes. In particular, according to a Global Witness report released just a few months ago, between 2012 and 2023, over 2,106 environmental and land defenders between 2012 and 2023 were murdered. Needless to say, that is almost definitely an underestimate. And that is nothing to say of the rampant assault and abuse that comes from extractive industries and the people who work them. The attitude that we can continue taking and taking and taking from our lands is the same attitude that our current cis heteropatriarchal system views towards women. We are not going to be able to make progress on the climate crisis until we end up having more respect for women and femininity. We are not going to be able to have respect for the earth unless we recognize how these current quote-unquote solutions and the current destruction that is going on is killing our relatives across the globe, especially our women, femme, two-spirit, and queer relatives. In any case, the US military is the largest polluter in the world. I'm sure you all are aware of that. And has been doing quite a lot to murder our Indigenous relatives across the globe these last couple of years. That is to speak nothing of ethnic cleansing that has occurred in places not too far away from here. This attitude is only enabled because we have embraced a colonial mindset, because we have decided to continue extracting and extracting and extracting. Current transitional minerals, or as they are better called, profitable minerals, because they're only critical because colonial power systems have decided they are, because they do not want to give up our current standards, like current Western standards of life, in order to continue their survival of our planet. We have lost all sense of reciprocity. About 75% of those quote-unquote critical minerals in the US alone are located within 35 miles of native lands. And that's just the lands that the EPA has decided is ours. This is something that is repeated across the globe, with false solutions causing mining and extractive industries to desecrate sacred sites, for instance, Oak Flat in Arizona that the San Carlos Apache are fighting against, and many places around the world. In particular, our relatives in Abayala, in what is now considered South America, are at greatest risk of being murdered simply trying to defend our land. Therefore, the climate crisis is absolutely a humanitarian crisis, and we are not going to be able to solve either of these until we have a cataclysmic paradigm shift. I understand that might not be a very satisfying answer to what we need to do and what our solutions are. Guess what? There is no satisfying answer. Because for some people, this is a matter of life and death. For some people, this is a matter of comfort, and too many people for whom this is only a matter of comfort are the ones at the decision-making tables. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those really powerful words, Sheila. So at this time, I'll introduce myself again. My name is Dr. Frances Roberts-Gregory. I'm a feminist political ecologist and environmental anthropologist, currently an environmental fellow at Harvard University, which sits on the traditional and stolen lands of the Massachusetts people. I also serve on the steering committee of the Fem Green New Deal, on the advisory board of the HBCU Green Fund, and I'm co-chair of the advisory board of the High Fund for Climate and Gender Justice. Most importantly, I'm a proud member of the UNFCCC Women and Gender constituency here at COP29. My journey with the Fem Green New Deal, as well as the WGC, has led me to uphold many of our feminist principles. These include intersectional gender analysis, advancing reproductive justice, rejecting false solutions, creating regenerative and feminist economies, as well as upholding democratic, community-led solutions, youth leadership, and of course, centering Indigenous peoples' rights and leadership. As a scholar, educator, activist, I'm also committed to feminist climate action, and I remain in solidarity with oppressed and oppressed peoples around the globe, including those experiencing genocide and resisting a rise in global fascism. Nevertheless, I'm oscillating between grief and joy. Grief over the outcomes of the recent US election, and joy over deepening relationships with feminist colleagues from within and beyond Turtle Island and those on the African diaspora. In the USA, Black women as a demographic, Black women who look like me, 91% of us voted for progressive Democratic candidates, and countless others voted for third-party candidates. Despite the violence perpetrated against us in our communities, we show up for democracy and show up for human rights for all. We are grieving, yet we are still organizing and making space for much-deserved feminist rest. Last year, I spoke about using my feminist activist scholarship to advance a feminist just transition. But that just transition is currently threatened by a new administration with deep relationships to oil and gas, and world leaders who are often not qualified to hold their positions. This is particularly alarming when we see a growing trend of overqualified Black women and other women of color, particularly environmentalists of color in the United States, who are being harassed, reassigned, doxxed, and fired. We are being asked to sign NDAs or non-disclosure agreements. Wage theft is rampant. We cannot lead in policy, whether it's science policy, climate policy, or education policy, when our politically appointed leaders cannot be trusted, and when we are pushed out of positions of power and opportunities for influence. This silencing and censoring is already having dire consequences for communities of color, gender diverse peoples, as well as working class communities across the United States. Nevertheless, we persist while we resist. I'm happy to announce that this year I was able to support the Chisholm Legacy Project run by our own Fem Green New Deal member Jackie Patterson in designing a Black liberation and just transition and gender and climate justice training curriculum. This curriculum was centered in Black feminist and eco-womanist principles. These types of initiatives will fill the gaps left by an education system in the United States that is currently attacking critical feminist, social justice, and abolitionist perspectives on US history. As a feminist anthropologist, I also know that it's important that we organize with our international colleagues. I've spent time with folk in multiple countries this year, including Germany, Tanzania, Mexico, and now Azerbaijan, to celebrate wins as well as grieve losses. Some of these wins include, for example, the Hive Fund moving 80 to 90 million to more than 150 organizations across the US South, mostly led by women of color, and also billions through federal funding to frontline climate justice organizations. Yet challenges remain. We must protect our environmental and human rights defenders. We need legal support. We still have fundraising challenges with wealthy donors and new donor advisors. And frontline communities still need resources to support organizing, education, advocacy efforts, and most importantly, protect what's left of democracy. So in closing, this year has deepened and challenged my understanding of feminist solidarity and the risks we feminist funders and feminist allies take. Don't forget to protect us and protect Black women. Here at COP, we're still advocating for feminist climate justice, including an ambitious gender action plan, which my colleague will speak more on, and we're fighting false solutions. Finally, we need to support academics and archivists like me to historicize the present moment. So as we make room for mourning and grief, let's also make time for collaborative storytelling and problem solving. Let's dance together and organize together like our lives depend on it. Thank you. And I will now pass to my colleague, Bridget.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you so much to my colleagues on this panel with me. I think that all of your testimony has really brought into sharp contrast the lived realities and the analysis that we are bringing into this space, and then the ability to actually push for transformative change in these negotiations. Catherine is completely right in saying that, you know, women's rights activists, indigenous peoples, gender advocates come into this space to hold the line on rights, to hold the line on pushing for progressive action in a space that is constantly trying to tear down solidarity and tear down multilateralism. And I speak from the specific perspective of the negotiations around gender that have been happening in this past week. We know that that is not necessarily a vehicle for transformative change, but we think it is a critical vehicle for bringing social dimensions and a gender lens into climate policy. And what we have seen here is that the only reason that this is on the agenda is because feminists have held the line and pushed that we needed to have a strong action plan that would take into account gender inequalities across all climate action. The only reason that it became a priority for the president is because of the push that we made to ensure that it was not just on the agenda, but on the clear political agenda for outcomes here. And we do want to see an enhanced 10-year work program. Right now, the text is in the hands of parties to decide if they will take it or leave it. We are hopeful that they will, as a political symbol, that they will keep the Gender Action Plan, the Lima Work Program on Gender, as a 10-year program where we have now the ability to deliver a robust gender action plan. But I also want to be really clear about what we faced in the negotiating rooms. We were trying to bring an expansive understanding of gender equality into that space. We were trying to bring a feminist analysis that women cannot be seen as homogenous, that we need to understand intersecting identities and diversity, that when we're talking about gender-responsive climate policy, we're not just counting who's in the room, we're talking about the lived realities of women human rights defenders, of Indigenous women who are facing extreme violence in their homes, in their communities, standing up and speaking out for environmental issues. That language was rejected from across the text, from across the negotiating streams, language on rights, not just in the Gender Action Plan, but across these negotiations. And so we're really bringing a message of understanding that as we push for these political symbols and for the negotiated text in this outcome, we are not disillusioned to the deep political work that this is. We know that misogyny and extractivism are intertwined. They're deeply embedded in authoritarian movements on the rise today, and that fossil fuels are not just an environmental issue, but one of power and control, especially over marginalized communities and women. The same folks, the same people who are pushing an anti-climate agenda are also the architects of a growing anti-gender movement threatening women's rights across multilateralism in the United States in the most recent election and really around the world. So we are not disillusioned in terms of where we can experience progress and where we are pushing for change, but we're also not seeing that change will come from this process alone. We recognize the deep power imbalances that are going into even spaces like the Gender Action Plan, and even if we do achieve to hold on to a 10-year work program and a gap, we know that that is just a starting point for our fight in bringing a feminist vision for climate justice.
Thank you so much, Bridget, for that update on the gender negotiations. In the spirit of joy and feminist solidarity, we will close with a poem from our colleague, Parneet.
I am a poet from India and the founder of Poetry for Planet. The poem that I'm going to share today is the story of my mother, my grandmother, and countless women in Punjab. They don't speak the language I'm communicating to you in. But this is a message from where I come from to tell you that we need to decolonize the narrative. We need to talk about intersectionality in these spaces. When I think of good food, I think of my mother, her ghee-laden bread. I think of my grandmother, her buttermilk and curd. I think of my aunt who plants mangoes in little pots. So I unbraid my hair all the way to the root, to the very first farmer, a young woman. I reckon she would sow wild berries playfully along the banks of a dainty river for her children to harvest. Yes, you and me. So I sow one and my sisters too, as we walk in the footsteps of a great-grandmother. Yet, when I ask you to picture a farmer, doesn't your brain conjure up the image of a sweaty man holding a sickle? However, nor far from truth as I speak of a saga unforetold. Less than 2% women own land in my Punjab, the land of 5 rivers, yet none flow to the fields of my sisters. When I think of good food, I think of Ceres in Rome, who blessed humanity with the gift of agriculture. I think of Isis in Egypt, who blessed humanity with the gift of agriculture, who saved man from man by offering him barley instead. I think of Annapurna in Kashi, who had God at the mercy of food. So, when I ask you to picture a farmer, is it a young woman, roughly my age now? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Parni. At this time, I think we have time for maybe one question from the audience, and then we will close. I think I saw your hand out in the back.
Hi, thank you all so much. Melina Walling with the AP. I'm just wondering if you can talk about what's kind of the best outcome you can hope for at this point from the text. And yeah, just any kind of concerns about, the next few hours and days here. Thanks.
If speaking specifically about the gender text, I think that at this point we are hopeful with the cleaned text that was presented this morning, the new text that has come out, that and we recognize that there is, even though there is a lot of compromise in that reflects the messaging I just shared of a really growing anti-rights and anti-gender movement, which doesn't allow us to push for a progressive and understanding of gender equality and what it looks like. At the same time, we recognize that many parties push to hold on to agreement, which would establish a 10-year Lima work program for us to continue doing this work, to continue bringing examples of gender-responsive climate policy that is being led at local level, that is being led in communities into this process, and that feels like an incredibly important entry point to hold on to advance our understanding of human rights and social dimensions in the space. So we hope that this text will be approved. There's also a very clear roadmap for developing the gender action plan. And so for us, what is presented currently is the best outcome, notably because there was a lot of attempts to roll back on rights in the text that we had in terms of not mentioning or referring to language on human rights and gender equality, and there is no rollback on that in the current text.
With that, we thank you for coming to our press conference, and please remember to uphold the line in feminist climate justice. Thank you.